Directors for C. Welcome to today's webinar. Krista, if you can take this as your cue to start recording. So again, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Andrea Zimmermann, and I'm here with Steve Voytek. He's the Government Relations Manager here at NASDCTEc. And today we're going to be talking about employer engagement in CTE. And this is actually the second of a two-part series looking at employer engagement. And this is really going to be focusing on how two states in particular are approaching employer engagement and the ways in which it is impacting their state and CTE within their state. So first, to really get started, I'm going to give a special thanks to our webinar host, Krista at Cisco. If you have any problems throughout the webinar that are related to technology or technical difficulties, issues with speakers, etc., feel free to please use that chat box in the bottom right-hand corner and send a message to Krista directly, or you can even just put all attendees, and she'll make sure to jump right in and flag whatever questions that you might have. I also want to encourage you to use this chat box throughout the webinar because as we talk with our two states, we will be fielding questions from all of you and directing it to the states, and we'll be having three separate Q&A sessions, one for each of the states, and then at the end kind of a general one to catch any last questions. So please be sure to use that chat box. You can send questions, again, out to everyone or directly to me, to Andrea Zimmermann, and we'll make sure to those questions directed right back to the states and get your questions answered. So with a little bit about what we'll talk about today, we're going to focus on why we're talking about employer engagement at all, and really centers around some major findings from a December 2014 report that NASDCTEc published, focusing on the state of employer engagement and really looking at the state level and the state role in employer engagement. And then we're going to talk to two states, Alabama and Kansas, about what they're doing in respect to employer engagement. And then, as I said, those Q&A sessions. Before we really begin, I want to introduce our panelists. From Alabama, we have Dr. Philip C. Cleveland. He's the Alabama State Director for CTE and Workforce Development. Joining him will be his employer partner, George Clark. He's the president of Manufacture Alabama, as well as the chairman for the Alabama Workforce Investment Board. And a third title that I just couldn't fit on the slide is vice chairman for the Alabama Workforce Council, and he'll explain more about what all those hats are that he wears. And from Kansas, we'll have Dr. Blake Flanders. He's the Vice President for Workforce Development in the Kansas Board of Regents, and his employer partner, Kevin Ward. He's the public sector consultant for the company Train. And take it away.
Andrea, as you mentioned, the issue of employer engagement within CTE is not a new one. Even within its earliest conception as vocational education, it really didn't exist without having employer engagement at the table. So by definition, CTE is a partnership between education and employers. That's why in 2010, our organization convened state leaders, national stakeholders across the country to craft a vision for the future of career technical education. One of our 5 principles in this vision document is about the importance of the partnership between CTE and employers. While we acknowledge the historic and essential significance of this partnership, we also spoke about the need to evolve the relationship between CTE and the business community to address the needs of the rapidly changing economy. At that time, we were faced with very different challenges than we are today. We were just beginning to speak about the importance of college and career readiness. We very much were in the midst of a deep economic recession, and the role that technology plays in the delivery of education was just beginning to be realized. In the face of this, we wanted to help address the changing demands of an ever more globalized economy by upgrading the partnership between CTE and employers. We wanted to move away from the more traditional role of employers participating in sometimes superficial advisory capacity and more towards more meaningful engagement activities where the business community are truly collaborative partners. They're both co-owners and co-developers of the CTE enterprise. A lot of work has been done over the past few years to move the needle forward in terms of this evolution. Those key levers, which I'll speak about more specifically in just a second, is the Carl D Perkins Act. While we do like many areas in this law where employer engagement can be supported, we remain hopeful that we can strengthen and expand upon these provisions in the next reauthorization of the law. As this process unfolds, it will be critical to remain committed to balance the various interests and needs of all stakeholders, students, programs, and employers, both in the long and short Federal policy must address the many different realities, economic, geographic, and otherwise, experienced by states and local communities to effectively craft policies that can promote the type of employer partnerships that we're going to hear about more specifically in just a minute. Next slide. Take a brief moment, look at the methodology of our report that Andrea just mentioned. We approached employer engagement as a topic last summer with one central question in mind. What does employer engagement in CTE look like throughout the country? Secondly, but equally important, we look to explore ways in which states are fostering and extending on these activities. Until we surveyed NASDCTEc's core state director membership last August, over 46 states and 1 territory respond. We also conducted a dozen formal interviews with relevant stakeholders such as employers, state directors, relevant state staff, and other key national leaders. I want to move to the sort of big findings of the report. Obviously, one of the questions that we asked our state directors is whether or not they've seen employer engagement increasing in the past and whether they see it increasing in the future. Again, as you can see by the chart, overwhelmingly we see a overarching attitude that this is something that has been growing in the past and is going to continue into the future. For the purposes of this webinar, we broadly define employer engagement to mean any type of formal collaborative activity between CTE and employers. Really, when we speak about employers, we're really talking about a wide range of entities, all shapes and sizes, from organized labor all the way to private sector enterprises, both small, medium, large, and size. Next slide. Let's now turn to the core elements of our report. As it goes, a central question in this project was exploring ways in which states foster and cultivate their engagement within CTE. Federal legislation, specifically the Carl D Perkins Act, is a primary policy tool available for states for this purpose. The national investment in CTE, the Perkins Act reinforces CTE's central role in promoting and maintaining the country's economic competitiveness by linking to industries that require high skill, high demand, and high growth occupations, in part by promoting and helping to foster these partnerships that we'll hear about more today. To this, Perkins was crafted in a way that allows for some degree of flexibility for states to determine how best to leverage the legislation. The first point that I want to really highlight is contained at the very outset during the development of a state or local Perkins plan. Perkins requires both state and local Perkins grant recipients to develop plans for how the legislation will be effectively used for a specified period of time. During the development of these plans, state and local recipients are required to consult with representatives of business and industry. It's definitely something that we've seen as a way to formalize some of that employer input. And while employer input isn't necessarily required in the development of individual CTE programs, it's important to note that many state and local recipients have undertaken such efforts, particularly through the creation of local advisory committees. Other points that we identified falls within the state's leadership activities set aside. Currently, Perkins allows % of their overall allocation for statewide CTE initiatives, including in part support for these types of partnerships and employer engagement activities. According to a survey that we conducted earlier last year, the majority of states reported using these funds to support such partnerships, and a greater number indicated that these funds were used to support programs offering work-based learning opportunities. And most interesting for our purposes here are states that have used the law to establish additional eligibility requirements for local Perkins grant recipients. Those states have used Perkins for this purpose in 4 key areas: requiring employee participation on local advisory committees, the community to participate in work-based learning opportunities, employer-led or provided professional development for instructors or administrators, and finally, monetary or in-kind contributions. Advisory committees were by far the most common additional eligibility requirement states indicated having established for local Perkins grant recipients. We really dug in deeper into these results. We found that these local advisory committees can vary considerably in shape, size, and composition. However, the common thread among each was the formalization of employer input via this framework. Of work-based learning opportunities such as internships, mentorships, apprenticeships, along with similar employer-led activities for CTE instructors and administrators. We also classified as professional development, where both other requirements a handful of states have recently added onto Perkins local grant recipient eligibility. Though these figures may seem low, it is definitely encouraging to see some states committing to the importance of these activities, particularly in the light of the resource-intensive nature both of them require, and some of the other sort of legal obstacles, such as concerns over workplace liability and possible custody concerns on the part of employers. Only 2 states reported requiring in-kind or monetary matches from the private sector for Perkins grant eligibility. We most likely conclude here that these are difficult matches to leverage, particularly if a clear ROI cannot be established. Sustainability of these funds over the long term is also something that we noticed as we really started to research this area. I'd really like to hand it over to Andrea, who can take a closer look at what's going on with some of the state-level initiatives here.
Thanks, Steve. So one of the other levers that we really took a look at was state policy, all of the variety of opportunities under that umbrella. And we really did find that states are using states in many, many different ways to foster employer engagement in CTE. And really this was also, in my opinion, one of the most valuable aspects of this report was this treasure trove of state examples. And so what we asked states to identify the types of policies and programs that they used to foster employer engagement in CTE. And you're going to likely hear some of these topics reflected in the commentary later from the states. And interagency collaboration was actually the most common activity that we found. And this can range from informal meetings where CTE is increasingly having that seat at the table, being brought into discussions with other agencies. It could also include the state CTE director being a sitting member of the state's workforce investment board, or even explicitly making CTE a part of the state's economic development strategy. Additionally, pilot initiatives, state-level guidance, and competitive grants all had similar levels of activity that we found of the states using. And in fact, there's some overlap, I will note, of some of these categories, including, for example, pilot initiatives sometimes can be piloted through competitive grants. But what we really found was that guidance, for example, state-level guidance, can come in the form of like a handbook that the state puts out to help support local employee engagement, such as in North Carolina, or perhaps also other manual for best practices for local advisory committees to really help the local best craft those advisory committees to have meaningful and sustained employer engagement. And one of those examples came from Colorado, where we found one of those manuals. I'll pause here to note that on our website, you can find a compendium of these state examples that we found as a result of our research, interviews, and survey to help best direct you to work-based learning examples, state guidance, et cetera. I really encourage you to take a look at that. Pilot programs also were very popular, as I mentioned, and one of those examples is in West Virginia, where the Simulated Workplace program was actually created as a direct response to industry demands, and the state actually designed the program with employer partners right at the table, and they all worked collaboratively to do that. The idea was essentially to turn the CTE classroom into a company and effectively bring the workplace within the 4 walls of the classroom. And the program structures the CTE course as a student-centered simulated work experience, that exposes them to standard practices tailored to the industry that they wish to enter. Also, the state used MOUs, which was another states often use, and they use those MOUs actually with their state chamber of commerce to solidify commitments to help recruit employer participation in the local pilot programs. Now, the underused strategies that we saw came on the other end of the spectrum, and those were tax credits, MOUs I mentioned, and actually a clearinghouse. We found no states said that they were really using a clearinghouse. And, with the clearinghouse, we had asked a separate question on the survey asking about whether states are, collecting information on local programs, employer partnerships. And really less than half of states said that they do this in any sort of way. And while states collect this information formally, it could be an opportunity for uncovering best practices and then compiling those into a clearinghouse of information for local schools and institutions who are looking for other ways to really accelerate and enhance their employer engagement. And another way in which employers do participate in this in the CTE system is really through standards development and credential selection. This is in fact one of the most common forms of employer engagement very often in a state. And this idea of being a part of this process of developing the CTE standards or selecting which credentials or technical skills assessments should be used in CTE programs. And 43 states said that employers are participating in at least one of these processes. In Tennessee, for example, they use the input or industry advisory councils and the other key labor market data actually to inform ongoing CTE standards revision process. In Kansas, and I'm not sure if they'll cover this today, but in Kansas, employers essentially drive the credential approval process through participation on the state's Business and Industry Committee, which provides recommendations on nationally recognized third-party credentials. So as you can see, there are many ways in which states are leveraging employers, and they're doing so in meaningful ways to improve CTE across their state. Now, what I'd like to do is pivot here to dive a little bit deeper, and we're going to start off with Alabama, and I'll pause here to note again, as Alabama is giving their presentation, please feel free to send us along your questions that are specific to Alabama, because immediately following their presentation, Steve and I will be moderating a very brief, about 5-minute Q&A with them to kind of help further unpack what they have to talk about. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Cleveland and George Clark.
I would like to begin just by saying that George and I are interwoven with our work from the State Department of Education to the industry, and I'm going to give you some examples of that, and then George is going to kind of talk about his process and support as well. What I'd like to begin by saying is in 2011, the State of Alabama Department of Education established a career tech commission. That commission was charged with helping to define what we need to do in Alabama public schools. With that, outcomes of that led to things like us going out and meeting with local school superintendents with the local workforce data and helping superintendents realize that there were gaps in program needs that were directly leading to the industry needs. So we went out and met with each superintendent in 2012-13 and helped them to have a visual of where those gaps existed. Also in 2014, our Alabama Industries defined what is a career-ready student. With doing that, they defined what are those career indicators, those credentials in each program area that we would say a student would be career-ready at graduating from high school. So that's what we use as our definition of a career-ready student when it comes to career readiness. Again, those were all defined by Alabama Industry, and that's the only way that those credential lists can be changed is once our Alabama Industry Advisory Committees, if we vet that, they agree to it, we add that. Otherwise, it cannot be changed. The next thing that occurred in 2013 from an industry engagement standpoint was a CTE bond of $50 million. That bond was initiated through our Alabama Industries, and it was for new program startups that were in direct connection to the workforce data. They could not start programs at their pleasure. They had to start programs and document the industry need. Those funds were used to start new programs, equipment renewal, and again, it had to be industry driven. About 10 years ago, the state of Alabama instituted what we call our business and industry certification process. This process is an ISO certified process, and it entails an industry partner being at the table. So on an annual basis, our programs are reviewed, but every 5 years, an industry partner comes into a program with a State Department liaison, and they go into a program and ensure that the facilities, equipment, instruction, teacher certification, there's a multitude of things are in place, and we have that ISO certified so that we get complete compliance across our whole state. That has really elevated the quality of our programs because of the standards that are set forth by our industry partners. Last thing I'll mention before I turn it over to George is a state-sponsored apprenticeship. Again, these apprenticeships are industry driven, and we just started this current year of state funds to allow an industry to start an apprenticeship, and we would fund that the first 3 years up to $30,000, and then beyond for sustainability, year 4, 5, and 6, the industry had to agree to sustain it on their own. Again, trying to promote that private-public partnership piece. So I'd like to transition to George at this time.
George, you need to unmute yourself. There you go. Looks like you got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Manufacturing Alabama is an association that represents manufacturers. Philip did a great job of describing some of the major projects that have gone on over the last several years. In my role, I am chairman of the State Workforce Investment Board, which is soon to be the WIOA board, and I'm also vice chairman of Alabama Workforce Council, which is a creation of the Alabama legislature. We were charged with developing a scheme and plan to align business, education, and government, and we're also been charged with coming up and advising the governor for a media campaign to enlighten the users and the ultimate user, the industry, and the students as the benefits of course in advanced manufacturing, nursing, or whatever it is that is needed here in the state of Alabama. A lot of information is going to be gathered through our regional workforce councils, and I'm bringing that up at this point to state that along with the other details that Philip gave about the $50 million fund issue, the regional councils have to, at region, certify that there is a need for particular skill sets in that particular region. Otherwise, why train them if they're not jobs available? The bottom line of everything that we're doing is we're going to try to emulate supply chain management when it comes to workforce development. And think of OEMs being the kings of supply management, the automobile manufacturers. They don't manufacture anything, they assemble. And depend on on-time delivery, and they depend on quality. And I use 2 examples to illustrate what we're talking about here in Alabama. We want to know how many people that we need in the pipeline. We want to know what the skill sets that they will need to have a successful career path in advanced manufacturing, and that's my love, but it could be nurse as well, or whatever issue, health care, or whatever situation may be. And what we want to do is ensure that we have a marketing campaign that addresses those particular skill sets that are needed, and addresses the parents who sometimes, especially in manufacturing, have been negative about their approach to it. Manufacturing is no longer the same. Manufacturing in Alabama is what is generally accepted as advanced manufacturing. All during this process this process, Cleveland has been a constant partner of mine. There's not a week that goes by that we're not discussing something, and the week, it's several times a week that we're in meetings together. He serves on the Alabama Workforce, the one that I'm the chairman of, and he's also on the inner circle of a working group that has been responsible for the efforts of the Work Council up until our year-end report, which we just delivered to the governor. And this is an ongoing process and a never-ending process, as advanced manufacturing, by its very definition, requires continuous training. And if we reach the young people through what we're doing right now at the high school level, we're successful here in Alabama or in the nation, in recruiting people into these advanced manufacturing jobs that are high demand jobs and all high paying jobs. That's a summary of where we are. We have a lot of things that we're looking to. We're getting ready to collapse a lot of state government agencies under the Department of Commerce. We're operating in silos. That is going to come to an end within the next 2 years, and that will improve all forms of communications and alignment between business industry and education and government.
Great.
Thank you, George and Phil. Really appreciate it. So we do have a few questions. Steve, would you like to start, or I can jump in? So my question actually goes to Phil first. You talked about this new program for apprenticeships, and I know it's new, so you may not have a lot of numbers, but we were wondering if you could kind of talk a bit more on the numbers of participation. Have industry been interested in participating in this program? And then also a second question to that is, once that state funding goes away, because you said it was terminal, how will you know that those apprenticeships will continue and they won't just fade as the state funding fades?
Definitely beginning to take off. We have meetings. We had one today with the industry sector. So what we're trying to do is not put our industry in a box. We send them an application and make them fill it out. We ask them for a summary of what they would like to do to impact their workforce and a budget at a max of $30,000, and we allow them to define the apprenticeship rather than us telling them you have to have this, this, and this, because who better knows their industry than the industry themselves. So they're really defining the requirements for their apprenticeship. Again, it's state funded at the same level for 3 years. At the conclusion of the third year, starting the fourth year, the company must sustain it at the same level. So year 4, they must sustain it the amount of money we provided year 1 and so forth up to year 6. And we're hoping that by the 3 years, it's a seed money that'll allow that to continue because they'll see their return on investment. And that's why we established it for a 3-year period.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I have a question to probably both of you. I'm not sure who could answer this. But we're speaking about the regional workforce councils and the sort of role they play in certifying the need for a specific, competency or skill with regards to program approval. Was that process applied retroactively as well? So did it require programs to be reassessed and reevaluated to ensure the programs were also meeting those same needs?
What happens there is now we have programs that are closing. I have one center that's closing 3 programs based on their workforce need and reallocating those units, those teacher units, to 3 other programs that are directly aligned with their workforce needs. So we have school systems that are really taking a hard look at the needs versus where it's been easy to start programs in the past. Now we're really looking at the workforce need and allocating our resources accordingly. All of that is governed through the workforce in the industry. So those councils look at that. Those councils are made up of industry are the only voting members. The government people are there as a resource, but the industry are the ones that established and voted those regional workforce councils. We have our state divided into 10 workforce councils, and that's how we administer our work.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, George. Mm-hmm.
The project there's one important thing that Philip and I both have failed to mention is the career coaches. And Philip, why don't you say a few things about the career coaches?
Sure. We have started an initiative where we have 36 state-funded career coaches that operate off the same job description. They're in our schools, and they're delivering their boots on the ground for industry is what I like to call them. Many of these people are not educators. They can be from history, and they actually go into the schools and really talk to the students and the faculty and staff about the industry and become that point of reference for educators, so that we really are pushing the information into the schools so that students can start making informed career decisions rather than decisions based off what is known. So those people are really going to help us transform our message as we roll this out across our state. The other piece of that that's enhanced is an MOU with our post-secondary partners. We are very closely tied to our post-secondary partners. We have an MOU that states our partnership. We have over 100 courses that are statewide articulated, and we have a private-public dual enrollment opportunity where right now every kid that wants to pursue dual enrollment can pursue dual enrollment at state-funded through an industry partnership where industry people are donating to this initiative as well. So it's a private-public partnership. So it's really interconnected when it comes to the pathway continuum from K-12 to the community college and workforce development.
And at what point in the student's career, from an academic standpoint, do they start? Is that in middle school, or is it even earlier?
In school, we have a state-funded career initiative where by the conclusion of the 9th grade, and many of our students are doing this in the 8th grade, they take an assessment that looks at their interests, their aptitude, and their work days, and it helps them define a career goal based on those inputs. And then we have a class that's required for graduation that every kid must take that really enhances that career exploration. This is in year 2 of that. We feel like it's transformational because it's no longer everybody's job. There's a person responsible for teaching a course of study that incorporates career exploration into that course. So that we feel like is really going to give us some great benefits. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, just to change gears for just a second. So, as I mentioned, a lot of states that we found through our report were, leveraging Perkins in a variety of different ways to establish additional sort of eligibility criteria for local recipients of federal funds. Would you be willing to sort of expand on some of that work that Alabama is doing in that space, particularly around sort of work-based learning with regards to Perkins funds?
We have really broadened our scope when it comes to co-op. On the job training, we allowed students to start doing this and gaining course credit for the same amount of time they would earn a traditional credit, where in years before it was almost double. So we really enhanced that opportunity. From a Perkins perspective, we've really been working with our local school systems to start focusing more on professional development, student org activity, different components that enhance the total package rather than just taking those funds, federal funds, and buying equipment. Obviously, with our equipment buying, we were able to do this and really take it to scale, if you will. We've been able to see a huge emphasis put on professional development because of that, and to better for our teachers, because our teachers and instructors are having to go through the same credentialing in many cases as will the students in order for those instructors to be able to credential the students. We've seen a major change in emphasis when it comes to Perkins on professional development for those teachers. And then we are re-evaluating how we allocate our Perkins money currently, looking how we can do that to be more efficient and more effective and make sure that those funds are spent on high wage, high demand Alabama industries, and we're not at a point where we have our new proposal together, but we're definitely looking at how we do that.
Great. Thank you, George. We're going to segue now to Kansas, so we can make sure to offer some time, and then we'll follow up at the end if folks have some additional questions to Alabama. We can use that at our final Q&A section. So again, segueing to Kansas, we have Blake Flanders, who's the Vice President of Workforce Development at the Kansas Board of Regents, and Kevin Ward, his employer partner, the Public Sector Consultant at Train. Blake?
Well, thanks, Andrea, and it's great to have this opportunity to share some of the things going on in Kansas. I'm going to focus on a couple of policies and then have our business partner, Kevin Ward with Train, flesh out what's going on from the employer perspective. I would, just as background, say that the Kansas Board of Regents governs the public universities in the state of Kansas and coordinates all of the two-year colleges, which include community colleges and technical colleges. And one significant event that really highlighted career and technical education was in 2007. formed the Post-Secondary Technical Education Authority, which works under the auspices of the Board of Regents and focuses totally on career and technical education and improving those linkages with business and industry. And so today, if we go to the next slide, I want to focus on really two policies at the state level. First one is our Employer Engagement and Recognition Program. If we would go to the next slide. We recognize employers who are supporting our colleges in the field and those career and technical education programs. At present, we have this at the post-secondary level, and we're in development at the secondary level with our partners as well. I would say that just yesterday we went over. We have 80 business partners on the slide, but we just went over 100 business partners we've identified. And we allow them, our business partners, to be recognized at the state level at 3 different levels of support. That being the supporter level, the partner level, and the champion level. I'm happy to say that is at the champion level. Levels, the employer recognizes industry credentials as they applicants and the value of our career and technical education system. And then each level, specific activities that employers have participated in. They select activities within each level, include providing internships to students, participating in career fairs, being a guest lecturer in a classroom. In the case of train advocacy for the entire career and technical education system, Kevin has presented legislative testimony actually toward our system, and we know the value of that as that tends to give tremendous credibility to career and technical education. On the next slide, I might just show how industry was engaged with our traditional career and technical education programs. That slide is a little bit busy, but I would tell you that each existing program went through, and on the left side of the slide where it says, example, this is a machine technology program, Business and Industry has identified, a statewide committee identifies the credential that is needed. As you can see in each of these, as an example, NIMS Level 1 is identified in the first level, along with manual milling skills, which is NIMS Level 2. Each of these levels of certification also respond to a different level of occupation within the industry. So they aren't really stop-outs for dropouts, but they are a multiple exit point where a student might enter the industry before they complete a traditional full-length program, and then they can stop back in and continue to complete modules along the way. On the right side of the screen, you'll see that each of the levels is associated with college credit hours, and so the academic award in the form of certificates, A and C, and also the Associate in Applied Science degree exists on the right side of the screen. So the student not only leaves with a valued credential that assists them to enter an occupation, but they will have permanent college credit that can build perhaps even into a baccalaureate degree as they move on down the line. So with that, I welcome Kevin Ward, and he's going to really provide some detail about his partnership with our career and technical education system.
And first, on behalf of all my trained colleagues nationally, I'd like to thank all the state directors for this emphasis on employer engagement and the focus on mutually shared priorities that make these programs a success. Some of you are probably familiar with TRAIN and the tagline, it's It's hard to stop a train. They didn't know the train is a part of Ingersoll Rand, 100-year-old company, very significant. Our mission at Train is to make buildings better for life, and we do that through people, innovation, and technology. So this focus on career and technical education is a high priority. Matter of fact, it's a strategic program that I'll be talking about here shortly. As you can see, and as you might suspect, with all the technology involved in our industry, we've had a long history in education, not just our own technicians, but the contractors and business partners and the end users that utilize our technology. It's become increasingly apparent in this last decade, this business need to help close this gap, as we're faced with the same aging workforce that the rest of the baby boom industries are contending with. We'll be talking a little bit more about the strategic partnership with the National Coalition of Certification Centers, or also NASDCTEc. Next slide, please. So, investment model to address this immediate need for a better pipeline for a qualified technical workforce, we engage with our post-secondary business partners in Kansas and across the country in our NASDCTEc partners to make sure that we work together in a class fashion to align that curriculum to industry standards. And for that, through faculty with industry experience, there's a multiple ways to achieve that. One is a train the trainer program, which again provides a network of instructors who mentor and bring each other along. We accomplish this in these labs, in energy control technology labs, where we're working on building automation system certifications, recognized as the industry certification and stackable credentials. We don't stay there, though, because we need to really help focus on the entire talent pipeline. And if we go over to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about that. We're very committed to this initiative of rebranding career and technical education as a primary, prominent 21st century choice. And we accomplish that through several ways. One, boot camp for educators. We've conducted 3 of these with the Board of Regents and the Department of Education here in Kansas, and we have several more already planned. And this is an opportunity for math and science teachers and high school counselors to come on campus in one of our labs and hear business partners and instructors what 21st century career and technical education is all about. We have a program called the BTU Crew. It's a school and a high school version, and that's essentially building the pipeline from 6th grade on up, so that when we have opportunities in high school for those students to be selecting career paths, they're doing it with a greater context and perspective. We, as you would suspect, in Career Day, and we do both on the secondary campus as well as the secondary campuses to build that pipeline. We also have Train Day, which is a half-day team approach. Those students understand what is expected in corporate America today. So we have colleagues from our HR department, our service department, our construction department, our sales department, our engineering department, all participating in a workshops where those students can hear directly from an industry leader what's expected today. That also pays dividends in rebranding career and technical education as that prominent 21st century choice. We work first to escalate the recruitment through the National Letter of Intent Signing Day. That'll be coming up again on the 19th. You might visit the NC3 website to get more information about that. That's just an opportunity for students and their stakeholders and families to be recognized as they sign up for these high-tech programs. It is important, and we've done a number of different things. Blake mentioned the legislative testimony that you might expect. We also hosted the Kansas Department of Commerce's certification tour, which would focus on emphasizing through recruiting businesses that would recognize certifications in their hiring practices, their advancement and training practices, and the way that they engage their business partners. We also have conferences, including the recent WDI conference, Some attended that. You may have seen my colleague present at one of the plenary sessions about this very initiative. We're also on the National Coalition of Certification Centers board, so we're providing that feedback to those educational members and hearing from them what we need to be doing better. I'd like to hand it back for the questions.
Thanks, we really appreciate this. So I actually want to jump in first with a question to Blake, and Kevin, you might also have some thoughts on this. But when talking about that program alignment work that you did, I was curious if, did you get employers to, agree to these different levels, and how did you get everyone on board to agree with that?
What we had is a state level industry advisory committee, and the way this was selected is our local colleges selected people in their advisory boards, and then we also selected a few at-large positions in the state. So we began with that industry advisory committee, and through a facilitated discussion, went through and identified the education and training someone needed, varying levels of occupations within the industry. And as you can imagine, those are spirited meetings. At the end of the day, we would reach agreement on what was the best case for the entire state and the structure of that program needed to be. With the amount of local stability also needed to meet local needs. We have a very successful tool for industry to engage, and it doesn't require large amounts of additional resources because the current programs already exist.
To tap onto that question then, did you also have, when you talk about industry, that's kind of a broad term, were HR folk involved in that as well, or were they more like C-suite executives? Because one thing we've we've heard often is that sometimes within even a company that HR, human resources, and the folks at the very top aren't always on the same page.
True. Typically, it depended on the size of the company. Sometimes larger. Sometimes we wanted both small and large business industry to be represented. Sometimes, an example with a small manufacturer, the owner company might also be the HR specialist, and you won't see quite as much distance between management and HR. With large companies, most of the time it was individuals from HR that did much of the hiring, and at times there'd be two people from the company participate that could provide different perspectives. But I would agree that the hiring is done within the company is where we really need to promote the industry certifications, because that's where they're going to be valued.
Great.
Go back to this initiative particularly. I may have missed it in the presentation earlier, but are there any sort of target incentives for being incorporated as a champion on this list? What are those again?
Right now all we have is recognition. So businesses have been excited to be recognized. This is activity that is currently happening within our technical education community. And, we'd like to think through some additional incentives that we maybe could offer business for partnership. I will tell you that business does get the benefit of a skilled workforce coming out of these programs. So their support is not it's not just one way, that those graduates provide them the needed skills to make companies competitive. As we bid this out for the secondary level, we know we might have to have a slightly broader approach, because those are longer-term gains, longer-term results from engagement within the secondary level community. as a matter of fact, with this, we've signed a memorandum of understanding with our secondary partners, and we are hiring a person in addition that's going to be shared between secondary and post-secondary, just so that we can have continued daily sustained engagement with secondary partners and really provide the skilled workforce to Kansas companies that we can.
Thank you for that. So now I want to actually segue into our general Q&A section. So we're going to bring George and Phil back into this conversation. So for all four of you, we have a question from the audience asking about unions, and have you run across any issues with unions as a part of any of your work, and if so, how did you deal with that?
This is Philip in Alabama. We have, for instance, in welding, we have different groups of industry that would like and prefer different things. One wants NCCER and one wants ABS welding certifications, for instance. So we are responding to our industries, union or non-union. We're responding to those industries to meet their workforce needs.
I concur with what Philip said. We mine's basically, I say half and half. We have a relationship with the various union leaders, and when necessary, we for example, and I was chairman of the State Workforce Investment Board. We went to labor and ensure that they have representation on the board. And apprenticeship especially is where the issue, and it's an issue of perception, something that we have to deal with here in Alabama.
Add from the order for Kansas at all before we move on?
Yeah, we have, Kansas, a right to work state. However, on the state workforce board, I'm a member of that board, we have union representation, and we had a great relationship with labor. Times out of our post-secondary programs, the individuals might be recruited into apprenticeship programs where they begin working and actually receive credit within that apprenticeship for their post-secondary education. And so we feel like that's a great partnership that can put students in those high-wage occupations in those shops that are union within the state of Kansas.
Actually, we have a follow-up question regarding unions. One of the audience members says that she's had experiences with some work-based learning experiences that companies could partner in that capacity, but had struggles due to unions. Did you have any issues when it came to work-based learning and unions?
With that in Kansas, would defer to Philip and Alabama on that question.
We haven't had any issues or problems either. And the good thing about the on-the-job training right now that we're faced with, that's we're trying to figure out ways to remove the obstacle, is the age for a high school student entering the workforce. We have a school system that's actually working through a temp agency and creating opportunities for students that may not be 18 years of age. So there's ways to do that, and we've really not encountered any problems.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit, when we're talking about certifications, credentials, particularly with regard to employee role and sort of developing them and putting them to use, something that we've definitely seen on the national level is that there's a recognition that credentials should, really sort of build competencies and skills that an individual has. But when we can see postings for for job postings rather, we don't see those credentials or certifications put to use. We have a question from the audience, particularly around this sort of idea. Is there any pushback from industry regarding the use of the credentials? You guys sort of selected them as priority for the programs.
This is Blake from Kansas. I wouldn't term it as pushback. I would say that there is a reticence to require credentials just because the number of people that are available for middle skill, highway, career, technical education employment is limited. And employers are always, I believe, for a good reason, they will limit their pool of applicants. But having said that, I think times employers aren't using industry credentials because of an awareness issue. And through these initiatives, we're working to build awareness that those credentials exist and that they are validated by industry, and also provide a real common language between our education system and business community.
I would definitely agree with the communication problem. I would say that the credentials that we're using in Alabama are out in the industry's credentials. They're not our credentials. We don't depend on a national organization. In fact, we have some areas that the industry partners have said we want to create this assessment. So we have worked through the Department of Commerce, which is a third-party verifier. It has nothing to do with education, the Department of Education, and they have created an Alabama industry verifiable credential. So it, again, belongs to that industry sector. So if they don't embrace it, they're not embracing what they have created. And it puts the burden back on them to ask for the credential on a job application, ask for the work keys scores. Every kid in the state is taking work keys as a senior, so if you don't ask for that, and why is it of value? So we're really pushing the industry to step up and ask for these things that you have requested.
All right. I just have one final question. It looks like we've tackled the questions that came from the audience. But my final question actually goes to George and to Kevin. And I want to kind of flip a question that we put to the state directors on our survey, talking about how you have seen employment education for the past decade, how you see it go over the coming decade. Have you seen it increase, stay the same, or do you expect it to decrease?
Worse.
Kevin?
Yeah, this is Kevin with Train. I would say that maybe it didn't have the senior leadership at the executive level, certainly within our corporation a decade ago, but because of the business need to address this shortage of technicians that our industry is facing, for all reasons that we know, it's a high business priority now, not just a educational or a technician priority. It's a business priority.
This like night and day, and I think that last point has something to do with it. The retirement issue, the competitive nature of advanced manufacturing, business industry has gotten more serious about it. We probably been more serious about it and just honestly than education has. But all of a sudden, the planets and the stars here in Alabama have all come into alignment, and the difference is, like I said, like night and day, and I can go back probably closer to 3 decades.
All right, thank you. And we did just have one last question come across, and we'll use our last 30 seconds to do that. Many credentials only align with a portion of programs of study. Are you adapting the program of study, or are you using multiple credentials? And this probably goes back to the state directors.
A statewide course of study in the state of Alabama, and it's up for readoption in the next 12 months. And so we're going to take our industry-defined credential list and actually back into our course of study. So the credentials that are industry-defined will drive our courses as we move forward. We put in place people that are staff people that are working directly with industry, and their job is to make sure that list stays viable and current. Base industry needs. So that's going to drive our course.
Our thoughts on that?
Credentials through our early college or Senate Bill 155 initiative have crossed from post-secondary to secondary. Having said that, there are some career and technical education areas that do not have industry credentials at this time, and so our secondary partners have developed some pathway assessments to evaluate the learning of those students that would span the entire program of study.
Thank you so much, and we've run out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap everything up. However, you can find the our slides and recording on our website. Give us a day or two to get that posted, but we will have it there at careertech.org/webinars. You can also find our paper that we referenced at careertech.org/papers. We want to encourage you, if you'd like to join us in April in Washington, D.C., NASDCTEc has their annual spring meeting. You can find all of our registration information on our website. Additionally, this Thursday, if you'd like to join us for a Twitter town hall, this will be NASDCTEc and the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. We're fielding your career readiness questions. And finally, I'd like to give a huge thanks to our panelists who joined us today, Dr. Cleveland, Clark, Dr. Flanders, and Ward of Train. You can reach them at those email addresses there. If you have any additional follow-up questions, you can also reach Steve and I at our work emails right here. And we'd like to give a thanks to Krista for all of her help today, and encourage you to follow us on Twitter, our blog, or join us for any of our webinars. You can find all of that information there at the information. And thank you again to everyone, and have a great rest of the day.